Welcome to the Zimmerli Art Museum. I'm Julia Tulovsky. I'm head of Department of Nonconformist Art from the Soviet Union and Arts from Eurasia. And it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you tonight to the this event, which is a celebration of the reopening of the exhibition of Painting to Scale, and it's a new reiteration. And the exhibition was curated by Professor Jane Sharp. And on the occasion of the reopening, Jane has organized a panel, Rethinking Dissent in the USSR, Practices and Possibilities in the Arts. And we have very distinguished speakers, which Jane will introduce shortly. And I have the pleasure and honor to introduce Jane. Jane Sharp is professor of 20th and 20th century art in the Department of Art History here at Rutgers. She also acts as research curator of the Dutch collection of nonconformist art from the Soviet Union. And since arriving to Rutgers in 1999, she has curated over 20 exhibitions, including the present one, which you see around. And she has published extensively on the historical Russian avant-garde and Soviet-era unofficial art. A recent book, Thinking Pictures, The Visual Field of Moscow Conceptualism, served as the catalog for her exhibition drawn from the Dodge collection and held at the Zimmerli Art Museum in 2016. And this exhibition was recurated with colleagues from Tallinn and joined art from Moscow and the Baltics. And it took place in the National Museum of Estonian Art in 2022. Professor Sharp is currently completing a book on the Thaw-era abstraction in the former USSR. And with that, I give floor to Professor Sharp. Please welcome.
Thanks so much. Welcome, welcome, everyone. It's great to see you here. So I just wanted to begin by giving you a little sense of the program today, which will consist of me introducing our speakers, then giving a kind of brief overview of the show, very brief, followed by questions that I'll pose to them and that we will pose to each other, so an informal conversation. And then at the end, I'm hoping that you all will also participate in the discussion by asking questions or commenting. So let me first, right away, introduce our speakers. Today's panel participants are uniquely experienced and very much engaged in parsing for us, whether as readers, curators, or viewers, the ambiguities and tensions that have defined unofficial or nonconforming art and literature for decades. Dr. Elita Ansone, here, is chief curator of the second half of 20th and 21st centuries collections and research department of the Latvian National Museum of Art. She has researched problems of interpretation of socialist realist art and the art associated with hyperrealism, linguistic conceptualism, and feminism in Latvia. She's curated numerous thematic exhibitions, has compiled collections of articles and catalogs, and curated many monographic exhibitions of Latvian artists' work, including those represented in this exhibition and elsewhere in the museum. So Irina is right around the corner in the hallway, in the study gallery that you just walked through, a work by Ojar Abels, who I think she'll be addressing today, and also Gemma Skulme, whose work is on view upstairs in the main Dodge gallery. Dr. Ansone was recently also appointed curator of the new Arsenal's exhibition hall in Riga, focused on historical modernist and contemporary Latvian art. Mark Lipovetsky is a professor in the Department of Slavic Languages at Columbia University, where he runs the Contemporary Culture series that organizes talks, conversations, and symposia on the most significant aspects of contemporary Russophone culture. He's the author of 12 monographs, 200 articles, I have a feeling that's an understatement, of Russian postmodernism, new drama, Soviet literary and cinematic tricksters, Soviet underground culture, as well as various aspects of post-Soviet culture. He remains a major scholar of the literary and conceptual works of nonconformist poet, author, artist Dmitry Prigov, a figure perhaps central to the questions we probe today. Dr. Lipovetsky's publishing reaches beyond academia. He's co-authored the 2018 Oxford History of Russian Literature, edited collections of articles on Russian literature and culture of the 20th and 21st centuries, including volumes on Prigov, Vladimir Sorokin, Vladimir Sharov. He's co-edited, and this has just now come out, an Oxford Handbook of Soviet Underground Culture, published just this past year. He's the recipient of a 2014 American Association of Teachers of Slavic and East European Languages and the Andrei Bely Prize in 2019. Irina Nakhova has worked, the artist represented here, has worked and lived between Moscow and the United States since 1992. She graduated from the Moscow Institute of Graphic Arts in 1978 and is recognized as one of the pioneers of the genre of total installation in Soviet underground art. Nakhova concurrently works with painting, creating structured environments from several superimposed planes and installations, the most vivid of which employ painting, digital printing, sculpture, and interactive audio and video. Since 1989, her work has been exhibited throughout Europe and the United States. In 2013, she won the prestigious Kandinsky Prize. In 2015, she became the first woman to have a solo exhibition at the Russian Pavilion for the Venice Biennale. In 2019, she had a solo exhibition here at the Zimmerli Art Museum, co-curated by me and my colleague, Julia Tulovsky. So a few words about the exhibition and just general thoughts about this project here, this talk that we're going to be participating in. My goal today was really to take the opportunity of the exhibition to reflect on and reimagine possibilities for interpreting dissent in the former artistic communities of the USSR. Since the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and especially now, over 3 years into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, artists, writers, and scholars alike have questioned the extent to which those we still identify as nonconforming, underground, or even dissenting artists may have accommodated, while still defying, official art institutions and the aesthetic program or methods of socialist realism. How does our present moment inform our understanding of underground culture as separate from but still embedded in Soviet life? How might we rethink the historical consequences of censorship against the ground of state and other institutional interests in these same spaces today? Curating this show has made such questions all the more poignant and necessary in the emerging, and I really have to emphasize this, emerging context of authoritarianism in the US, which I think very few of us expected just a few months ago, including the repressive actions of the present regime that involve explicit censorship ordered by the Department of Education within universities and schools. And this is happening as we speak now. So, to speak to the show then, my show was originally very open-ended. I simply wanted to move out of storage and mount on the walls our largest artworks, paintings and prints mainly, that we've rarely shown before because of their large scale or extensive serial formats. It's the first exhibition I think I've curated where I felt that I was acting somewhat ahistorically. Meaning if you look around the hall, including where you're sitting, and indeed throughout the exhibition, you won't find the kind of direct interaction or interdependency of painting to painting, artist to artist, that usually motivates displays here. Instead, I sought to question my own approach to the larger history embodied by the Dodge collection. A generative question emerged from studying in storage a range of art that seemed extraordinarily ambitious, paintings and projects that appeared to actually undermine or challenge conventional notions of nonconformity and dissent. I wondered, how is this possible? Considered together and as they are now installed, the show suggests that whatever struggles and disappointments gave meaning to these terms for individual artists, they were paralleled by and perhaps further fueled a commitment to reach wide audiences, to participate in the visual culture of their moment. So while these artworks certainly challenged Soviet-era prescriptions, such as a ban on abstraction or national symbols and personal registers of emotion, these artists nevertheless managed to create ambitiously, to exhibit their art, to cultivate viewers to varying degrees, anticipating or adapting to the very system they may have also rejected. So with that, those reflections, I wanted to pose a series of questions, and I'm really just going to begin, and then I would imagine, I hope, answers will be amplified by others, and questions posed by you to each other. So first, I'm going to actually address Ira Nakhova, in part because her work really motivated the show in the end. This is a rehanging of an exhibition that opened back in October, I think it was, with very different works on some of the walls, but also with a kind of hint or a promise of something that I wanted to arrive here, I wanted to realize, which was the installation of one of her major projects, the reinstallation of her ceilings, the seasons, which she created originally in 1979, but which she was never actually able to view in her own apartment, painting them even just two at a time, only seeing them as a whole when they were exhibited for the first time, I think, at the Tretyakov Gallery in 2015 or something, 2011 or 2015. So with that realization that we actually had in our archive something that I originally thought was a model for this larger project, but then turns out to have been a kind of compensatory addition to the Moscow Archive of New Art, in view of the fact that no one could see the work, she couldn't exhibit the work, I thought, well, how fabulous this would be to not only show the model, which is actually a reproduction of a work already created, but also to have it on view, finally, for the first time here, where you will see it now in this second room. So it really embodies both the ambitions and constraints that, in fact, for me still define that culture, the fact that with every ambitious project or with every constraint, there was a constant dialogue with possibility, with systems of authority and institutions. So that's realized here. I believe, for the first time in the US, and I look forward to seeing the real thing someday here. So I'm asking you now, I mean, since you just returned from Moscow, that's also why I'm beginning with you. I'm wondering how you understand the contrasts and perhaps echoes of the 1970s, 1980s underground in your experiences in today's Moscow, whether with the same population of artists or younger artists. Are any of the circumstances that you lived through with figures of authority, whether in politics or in the purely cultural sphere, are they transferable to today? So, and now you can take one of these, answer by using one of those.
Oh, and
Yeah.
you will be standing here.
I'm not going to be
will
standing there. I'm going to
maybe
go sit
I will
down.
Be standing there.
No, you can sit. Everybody can sit, or if you want,
I feel more
You're-
prepared when I stand.
you can stand.
Could I do that?
Please stand.
Thank you.
Sure.
First of all, I feel like I'm a relic here because it's a work of 1979. There are very few people who lived and worked in both countries, actually in three countries, in Soviet Russia, in Russia, Putin's Russia, in between Russia in the 90s, and in the United States. I guess I'm privileged to live that long, to have a perspective time-wise and also space-wise on all those circumstances. One of my works that Jane showed in my retrospective here, so to speak, retrospective, was a queen. That when you see something from afar, right? And it's a statue of a queen. And when you come closer, it blows up and becomes a huge condom. So you can see things up close. You really see things better from far away. So, and right now, because I lived and worked as an artist in Soviet times, and what's happening right now, and how the circumstances in Russia changed over time, I can see the similarities to what's happening here in these 3 months of the new presidency, and how drastically it changed in Russia after the war started. Even before the war, like in 2019, in 2020, even 21, it was possible to see very interesting artwork, somewhat not in the flow that was already the tendency that I saw over the years from the Putin regime there. It's fluctuated towards more decorative art, more art with no social bite, the art that were motivated from younger generation especially with the commercial environment, with a lot of new galleries there that were willing to sell art that is allowed to be sold. And since the war started, it's only more or less relatively decorative, easily digested art sold to new novarishas and to wealthy public and collectors. So I mean that this commercial environment that right now, because there's so much wealth accumulated over the years of Putin there, so from oligarchy and from his cronies and within new people who are paid to serve, and and also with the sanctions, the situation in Russia that it's more difficult for them to move the money, the wealth abroad. So they are really spending more money inside of the country. And for new generations that were born through with Putin, its people are 25 years old or a little bit older people who were born in the 90s, but they did not know what was going on in Soviet times. They did not have an experience living in this, so to speak, prohibitive environment. And right now, what is prohibited and what is permissible, the borders in between still are kind of blurred. So, but with the war, right now, a gallery which I was involved in Moscow, the owner of the gallery told me that they distributed the list of the artists who are prohibited from being shown. And those are the artists who signed kind of protest petitions after the war. So, of course, a lot of artists left, right? And there is new possibilities for them living in Berlin or somewhere else. But the people who stayed there, the older generation, which is dying, my friend, actually, I went to Russia because a very close friend of mine, curator Leonid Bazhanov, died, and I made a minute decision just to buy ticket and to go there, and I was there for his funerals. And trail of thought.
So maybe
yeah,
we can expand on this.
Right. And Also, I want to say that because of the commercial environment, and people don't know how the older generation knew how to behave and what is possible, what is not. My mother told me when I was a schoolgirl in school, oh, these topics you are not talking about at school. And so it was kind of inbred in older generation. So, with the perestroika, it's softly like loosened. In the 90s, there were hope and there were possibilities of freedom of expression. And then it slowly by slowly came to what's there right now. But so there are some possibilities for the artists that are evolving right now. Before you had the freedom in your apartment, I remember. So older generation withdrawing back to their apartments and, so to speak, doing their artwork in privacy. But people who are not trained to do that, of course, it's very difficult for them. But what I saw this time in Moscow, there was a wealthy guy who rented a storage space in his building on the first floor. And once a month, he's renting this storage space and making small private exhibits. He invites artists only by invitation. The public, it's like almost like apt art, so apartment art, but in a kind of semi-private space. There are small galleries. One of the galleries is called Bomba, and it's also in a kind of a, space that is impossible to reach without private invitation, and they do some small exhibits once in a while without any kind of censorship and stuff. And of course, with the digital age, by private VPNs, people are accessing some spaces through internet. And in Moscow, it's still readily available if you are savvy enough. So it's possible to do something over internet. For instance, before the war, right now it's virtually impossible. Maybe you heard of monstrations. That's people were organized by the internet and they went to protests in the streets. But it's not like I was the other day in Washington, D.C. with the posters against what's happening now. But it was a kind of a mockery of the regime. So, but nevertheless, it was still possible at like 2018, 2019. But right now, people are put in jail and for just individual pickets with empty paper, because somehow it's going back to everything is a threat to the regime. And
So Irina,
yeah.
let's,
I'm sorry, I could talk about it forever. So
so we'll continue that
Jane,
thought.
could you turn on the microphone?
Is it not on? It says it's green.
Nobody hear you.
This one.
could you hear me? Oh.
Okay, now, oh yes, this is now. Okay,
Sorry.
Great, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so, yeah, to continue the thought, I want to
No,
hear-
and of course, I'm absolutely open to questions because maybe I'm
Let's do that
too
at the end.
scattered. You could focus me on something what is interesting and important for you.
Can we do that?
Okay?
Yeah.
Afterwards.
I have more questions, yeah, for everybody.
Yes, sure. Sorry.
Mark, I was wondering, as you look across this period in time from the 70s or maybe even earlier to the creative work produced now, I'm wondering if you see a particular dynamic emerging. I think you've written about this in one of your publications, that there's a kind of reformatting or reappropriation of some underground practices in contemporary work. But I'm wondering, for writing, are you thinking about work doing in the diaspora here, or what you're familiar with emerging in Russia?
Thank you. Thank you for this question, and I'm very happy to be here, and I feel a little bit like an imposter, some distraction, because I'm not an art historian, and I'm surrounded by these pictures, and artists and art historians. So I will be speaking mainly about literature, which I know better. I think that the situation with literature is somewhat similar to what Ira just was speaking about. On the one hand, you all know about writers that had been labeled as foreign agents and undesirable people. Some of them are having heavy criminal articles awaiting for them if they dare to come to Russia with its satellites. You know about Zhenya Berkovich, who has been imprisoned basically for her staged production, which received the Golden Mask Award. So that certainly shows the change of the wind, very radical one. On the other hand, even after the war, we see a number of publications that appear in Russia that are theoretically unthinkable. For instance, in the end of 22, Ivan Limburg's press in St. Petersburg published the anthology of poetry written during the first 6 months of the war and posted in different social media. The title is "Поэзия последнего времени," which is a pun, of course, the poetry of the recent time and the poetry of the doomsday, basically. And it is compiled by your neighbor, the Princeton professor Yuri Levin, and published sort of due to the courage of Irina Kravtsova, who is the editor-in-chief of this press. And all these poems that they scream about the pain and the horror and the tragedy brought up by this war. In the beginning of 23, a magazine that not many know, journal Volga, published in Saratov, published the collection of articles by a contemporary poet, German Lukomnikov, who previously had the pen name Bonifacy, and I apologize for reading in Russian, and it's hard to translate into English, but I will just read his two very short poems, and I repeat, they were published in the officially published journal and appeared on the internet, of course. One of them is the following. «Люди добрые, в целом мире, если тот, кто б его нагнул, замочите его в сортире и скажите, он утонул». So that's the poem about Putin, of course. Another one is «Вставай, страна огромная, вставай на смертный бой, с фашистской силой темной, с самой, блядь, собой». And that was published, so that shows that as Ira just said, that the system is so far porous, and just another example, the very important press, which is both academic and non-academic, and the law, Новое литературное обозрение, continues to publish books and journals working under the conditions of censorship. They watch their language, so to speak. They try not to use the words for which they can be penalized, but people of our generation know how to say what we want to say without using particular words. That's not so difficult. Of course, it's some kind of violence, but it's better than not to have this work published. This is my position. I know that many have a different take on it. So these are just three examples of how literary works can still be published in Russia and still can address all these burning issues. On the other hand, of course, we have a growing field of the new Tamizdat, just right now there was an exhibition in Berlin of the Tamizdat publications and Tamizdat presses and journals, and you probably know about some of them, such as Freedom Letters Press, Medusa, this pretty famous media resource, is publishing its books. Babel Books, now a small chain of bookstores, is becoming press as well. And by the way, they published Birkovich's book of her prison fairytale, the text sent from the prison. There are several new magazines, so this field is also growing, and of course it is much easier to create Tamizdat today. So first of all, because it is much cheaper, secondly because it is supported by the internet, thirdly because you don't have to smuggle printed materials over the border through the diplomatic mail or any other devices. You can just send an email. So I believe that these forms are still developing. There is no samizdat per se, but there is internet, and internet is fulfilling this function. One may say that, so where are all these great works that sort of would shake the world? But they didn't appear in the underground culture right away too. It takes time. It takes sort of regrouping, and from what I know, and I don't know too much, I can see that this regrouping is happening. It's not exactly in the same forms and the same sort of formats as it was in the 60s or 70s, but it's going on. It's inevitably going to happen, and I'm hopeful in this direction.
That's great. Yeah, I was wondering two things that maybe we'll pick up eventually, is this notion of Aesopian language becoming felt again, becoming textured. Is this on? Yeah, okay. Yeah, this notion of Aesopian language becoming, that it never really disappeared in a way, that artists and literary figures are still thinking about ways to signal their inclusion in certain communities and yet remain safe, remain separate from the authorities. So that's continuing to happen.
I don't see much of this. I don't see many examples of Aesopian language. Those who could have been practicing this form, they're already labeled as enemies. So you see, Aesopian language flourishes in the mainstream. That Losif showed it by analyzing publications in Novomir and other presses and other similar venues. And such writers as Dmitry Bykov, Akunin, or Ulitska, right, they are undesirables anyway, right? So they now prefer to write in a much more direct way because they don't intend their publications for Russian big presses. The new generation of writers and poets, they prefer not to go into this direction for some reason, and they also prefer direct speech. And I don't think that we have the new wave of the Aesopian language. Aesopian language, in my understanding, is the form of coping. And so far there is coping with the regime, coping with the repression, coping with censorship. And nowadays we don't have coping. We have either full acceptance or full rejection. Maybe if this horror will last for decades and there will be a generation that will be born under this condition, they will learn to use Aesopian language. But so far, no. But so far it's only 3 years. Think about this. So we are in the 20s yet. We are not even in the 30s.
Well, thank you. Yeah. lots to think of there. So basically what has been discussed now really underscores for me the incredible difference or gap. We keep thinking of the Soviet sphere in some kind of homogenous way, but increasingly our discussions have also required a kind of decolonizing of our imaginaries, of how we think about creative work in different cosmopolitan centers. So I'm wondering, Elita, first about the war, whether since 2022 you've noticed different pressures emerging for contemporary art, since you're curating contemporary as well as historical art, and whether this kind of renewed pressure, this reappearance perhaps of censorship or problems further east in Moscow has caused you to rethink what was happening in the 70s and 80s and the relationship perhaps of artists working in Riga to those central practices in Moscow or prohibitions in Moscow, for example, against abstraction. Has the war, in other words, changed the possibilities for thinking about historical differences vis-a-vis the center, the former center?
Did you hear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Now in Latvia, in Riga, of course, we live under democracy, and there is big difference between how artists can act, can work, can live in Russia, and how it is possible in Latvia. It's absolutely different. Now, during last 10 years, it's not just since war, but since 2014, since invasion in Crimea, in our art appear a lot of political works dedicated to Russia attitude to Ukraine, to this occupation, aim of occupation of Ukraine, and it's different situation. We not need to hide. We not need to use Aesop language or double meanings. It's not necessary. I would like to tell one good action by artist. In Riga, there is embassy of Russia. In the other side of the street is one museum of Riga. It's Riga Medicine Museum. And artist made huge billboard. They will put in his face like symbol of death, like in skull's form. And the street behind the embassy of Russia, we recall street of Ukraine. So every person who go there and must read
It's the new address of the Russian embassy, actually.
Unfortunately, that was very, very big street, but it's directly on the corner of this building. There are really great works was created, political works, and it's like new blossoming of political art, because after 1991, when USSR collapsed, there was a period when Latvian artists became more spiritual, no political, because they had no to fight against something. And it's really new blossoming of political art. But if we look back and try to compare this situation from Soviet times situation, I think it's something absolutely different. Now is war going on. People are dying. And artists have to choose in what side you step on, I think even in Russia. And it's so difficult for artists in Russia, I think, to make this step. you out of law. You're out of law if you openly say that. I think it's absolutely different.
Even performances that ostensibly have no political direct significance actually do acquire it because of where they might be staged, you know?
The thing is that you are absolutely right. There are different strategies from the artists, right? If you have to stay there, if there is no possibility for you to leave the country for personal reasons or for financial reasons or whatever, right? So you have to totally withdraw from social or exhibition life, or which people were spoiled in the 90s and at the beginning. So it's very hard. So if a lot of my friends if they had to stay there, right, they do not participate in any kind of exhibits. Or, like, for instance, I decided for myself, even I had quite a lot of exhibits through Russia before the war. But then I decided I am not participating in any state museums or whatever. I can't do anything with the work that were bought there, so it's not mine. I cannot interfere with if some pieces are in the collection of a museum, let's say in Tretyakov. I can prohibit them to exhibit it, unfortunately. But I do not show my work during the wartime there. Some artists still, like Mark was addressing, kind of gray areas in between. They were still possible before because it's before the war, but it's also when your notion when the war started. For many artists, and for me too, the war started in 2014, not after the annexation of Crimea. So in those years before the full-blown war, it was still possible to do a kind of cutting-edge exhibits, but since then, unfortunately, it's a
Now,
yeah.
Go ahead, sure.
Just a very short. I want to support what was said about political art. I think that even in Russia there is a surge of political art. There was this exhibition in Amsterdam in August, I think, created by Vladimir Shalamov. It was called Aftershock, and you can find a short version of their catalog online. It's PDF. And all the art there is political art, and mainly from Russia. The authors of these works are hiding under pseudonyms, and some of them are not, but maybe they are already not in Russia, I don't know. And that's very uneven exhibition, but it is all political, it's completely political. Another example would be performance art, and performance art, as you know, in Russia now and in Belarus, also Belarus, is the most dangerous form of cultural activity. And Pavlensky was sort of the Pavlensky and Musirayet, of course, were opening this new trend, but there is a whole, a big number of young. They left, but there is new artists and new performances. We are reading about some of them. We have photographs of some of them. For instance, Katrina Ninashova, who is probably one of the most daring performance artists. She is still in Russia. Yes, she is. and she is sometimes posting on the Facebook. She's in hiding, but she does her actions, which are openly, challenging political views and stating her position in the very expressive form. So I think that these political events, they really produced a new wave of political art across the board.
Across different spaces.
What is amazing to me, I am looking at this wonderful exhibit, and that this kind of art in Soviet Union deemed to be underground. They were not shown and stuff. There is nothing political about those artworks. It's absolutely abstract art forms or realistic, but there is not a open political statements. Not at all. And they deemed through Soviet Union to be under breaking or whatever. People, artists, underground artists, because their artwork were not known in Soviet public, they were deemed to be heroes as if they were obtained some kind of secret knowledge. The same thing with poets, by the way, and writers. So it was just, in many instances, it was just experimenting with forms, and it still was deemed to be underground and provocative art. Yes, subversive art.
So
that's very strange.
So what seems to be emerging, it's kind of astonishing that there's a real divide now between official and unofficial. So anybody to have an exhibition at the Tretyakov Gallery, is there even a contemporary art now being created and shown in the Tretyakov Gallery, for example, or the Pushkin Museum, that would be of interest, or have they given up entirely? Because that is in complete contrast to what's happening in Tallinn, for example, or in Riga.
In Tretyakov's gallery right now, a lot of galleries that were dedicated to, for instance, to conceptual art or whatever, they are closed. And what is shown is social realism, back what was there, and very few artworks that are now considered by dead artists, so to speak. There are a few pieces by Kavakov, but it's all absorbed by the museum, by the culture. So it's mummified in some ways, right? So, and where is this border, what is alive and what is dead? So Kavakov was concerned about not everybody will be taken to the future. So in this one, in a mummified environment of Tretyakov's museum, he is there. But is it really spurring, provokes thought and action? So and where is the border in between, for instance, political activism and art form? This is
This is in complete contrast. I'm thinking, Elita, about your new research on Abols and Shlume, for example. So where you're able to draw very clearly this kind of in-between space that was also possible in different environments. But are you discovering now with your research that these artists really performed a kind of unique role in between? Or is this something that you have come to characterize as distinguishing perhaps nonconformism, if we want to call it that, or underground art in Riga from other places, from other Soviet contexts?
I think it's a very complicated question. and to define a border between non-conformism and conformism sometimes is not so easy. When we starting to research some biographies by artists who worked during 60s and 70s, we discovered that those artists, for example, I will tell one, not whole biography, but just example of one artist. Maya Tabaka. On back wall, there is a group of young musicians. Maya Tabaka, and this painting painted in 1970. Maya Tabaka belongs to the group of artists called French group. It was young, her friends, they were interested in French art, music, culture. They developed style, what was not typical for Soviet people. It was something stylish, modern, and in this picture also she depicted blues and rhythm group, musicians, and they also represent this modern life of living. In the mid-60s in Latvia and I think in all Soviet Union, rock movement developed. And rock movement was very, very censored because it was like harmful influences from the West. Was this picture censored? She painted in 1970. In the same year, she exhibited this painting in Young Artist exhibition, and in 1975 in our exhibition, and in 79 in West Berlin. There was her great, huge exhibition in West Berlin in 79. She was chosen for art exchange program for in West Berlin. It was academic scholarship for artists for living for a whole year there, painting, living, and make this art exchange. Non-conformists was now sent to the West for living for a whole year. Sometimes power use artists like informers. And there was society in Riga called Society for Friendship and Cultural Exchange between abroad. And now it's confirmed that it was KGB sub-organization.
The same in Moscow.
Yeah, and Tabaka was involved. I don't know what position she had there, but I think it was a tool how to push her to tell what's going on. KGB was very interested what doing our exile people, exile artists. So we don't know what exactly Tabaka told, and maybe nothing important. I think yes, because artists always try to cheat, to foolish this KGB agents and something like this. But anyway, it's not so easy to say yes or no. There is conformism and there is not conformism. And Tabaka developed a really distinguished career. After returning from West Berlin in '82, her painting was chosen for Venice Biennale in the frame of the Soviet Union exposition in 1984 in Central Artists House in Moscow was held her exhibition. So she was very successful artist, very popular, and I don't know, can we call her non-conformist artist?
Yeah, and this is in the 70s. This is really significant, the fact that
And
you're talking.
this is not the only example.
Right, right. Because I was thinking, I just learned doing research on these Latvian prints here, that one of the artists was actually successful in placing some of his prints on the cover of a journal, Avots, but that was already in the 80s. So this kind of blurring of boundaries was typical of kind of the dissolution or the falling apart of restrictions over time that you have also covered in your work.
In the Oxford Handbook of Soviet Underground Culture that Jane so graciously mentioned, Ansone Morse, a person who is also very important for, I would say, Tamizdat 2.0, authors the article about in-betweeners, and Ilya Kukulin, a very prominent art historian, cultural historian, has the article about gray zones. And basically our argument in that volume, which is 1,000 pages of the big format, that certainly this borderline is not set in stone, and it's very blurry, and just by, there were some artists that sort of declaratively said that no, we are not having anything at all with official publications or official venues, like Andrei Monastyrsky, for example, right? So he didn't have any official connections, right? But many artists of the conceptual circle to which Ira belonged, they, as we know, lived what they defined as double life. But was it life sincerely double? I don't know, because now my graduate students are absolutely, I don't know, enchanted and want to write about children's illustrations by Kabakov, Pivovarov, and Bulatov, which they apparently, according to their statement, considered to be some hack work, which only sort of, they earned their living, but the main work was done over there. But now, from the distance of 50 years, it's equally important, and it's easily, it's not hard to prove that these two sort of aspects of the activity were feeding each other.
No, I have to mention, of course, that artists from the 70s, 60s actually, and 80s, before the demise of Soviet Union, all these artists, they were able to do their work only because it was possible to have studios from Union of Artists. They very well paid from children books illustrations. They were kind of not politically involved, but still it was state publishing houses. And the most important thing I have to say that artists were never dissidents. They were not those 7 people who in 1968 went to the Red Square to protest the invasion of Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
They were always very cautious, including Kabakov and everybody else.
And Elita's made that point too, about dissent. It's hard to use that term.
The rule,
But it's time now for us to take a few questions from the audience, if that's possible. There's one right behind you, Brandon.
Thank you for this discussion. It's very exciting. So I have a question for Ansone, and that is, in the context of Latvia, where there's a different weight to history than there is here, and the pressure of current war, how do you exhibit art of this era? Do you do it in a way that's informed by what's happening right now? Or do you keep a rather pure historical perspective? to kind of survey what the line between nonconformists and conformists might be, as you were describing earlier. I was curious what it would look like in Riga.
You know, it's it's very uncomfortable question. And reason is very practical, no political. Now under reconstruction, one of the very big museums, and it's already 4 years closed and will be open in 2028. But anyway, when we exhibit, we made different also conceptual constructions and discourses. For example, I worked on feminist art exhibition, and my aim was also prove and find some examples from 60s feminist art. It's not so easy to in Soviet Union to find something feminist, but I found 3 women photographers who worked in photo club, Riga called this club, and they were only women in this men's club, and they each other made photographers, and they were so different for men's look at women. They were just young, independent women, and they depict each other, and I put this. So we tried to take some topics, some discourse, and put together the Soviet art and contemporary, which may be created specially for the exhibition right now. And this is way how we try to involve also this period.
Thank you. I have a question with regard to Ethiopian language, really, and Ethiopian language. I was wondering if in our days, things like fantasy writing, dystopian novels set in an alternative universe, if that would be considered Ethiopian language. And this is obviously not a new concept, like take anything by the Strugatsky brothers or Elita. This just goes right back into the 60s, and some of that stuff was published and was really very successful, but was really a critique of Soviet society. And then kind of continuing along those lines, can that be extended into the visual art? Because I think during the 60s and 70s and 80s in the Soviet Union, really the distinction between official and unofficial could often be traced along the lines of the genre and subject matter and style. Because if it wasn't socialist realism, it just was not official art. And now this is a lot more complicated. So how does that play out in contemporary visual art? Thank you.
Okay, I will begin, maybe colleagues will join in. Yes, you are absolutely right about fantasy, and fantasy has been used as a form of Ethiopian language in the Soviet period quite prominently, but as we know, in the Soviet period, fantasy, there was no such genre of fantasy. There was no such a word in the nomenclature of genres, right? And nowadays, fantasy is the mainstream. Fantasy is everywhere. I haven't seen anything yet that would be directly politically, addressing some current situation, but that's the most natural place where it should appear. Maybe it's in the making. However, I have another example that's slightly different, but it also said with fantasy. As you know, there is a number of homophobic laws in Russia, and basically LGBT had been declared to be the extremist international organization, which is unheard of, I would say. And gay people can be arrested and imprisoned as political extremists. And naturally, there shouldn't be any LGBT-themed literature in stores. And there was one book, young adults book, «Лето в пионерском галстуке», «Summer in the Pioneer Necktie», about the sort of young love of two young men in the pioneer camp, which was published and became tremendously successful. It produced sort of hundreds and hundreds of fandom writings, of illustrations online. It's a cult book, and of course it was aggressively attacked. Zahar Prilepin published some denouncement, etc., etc., etc. The book is still in publication. It's this thick, 500 pages, and it's still very, very popular. But we had a conference about queer culture, and the presenter from Toronto University, she showed that yes, this book is at the center of attention, and it has been persecuted in certain ways, but there is a resistance there. But there are hundreds of books, of fantasy books, either translated from Chinese or maybe not translated, but presented as translations from Chinese, which directly depict gay love and gay affairs, and they are all for young adults, and they are all in the genre of fantasy. Hundreds and hundreds of titles. So, as published now, as we speak, this is one of the largest sort of parts of the book industry, and all these, book supermarkets have huge sections of such literature. Luckily, all these lawmakers didn't open these books and let them stay illiterate as long as they can. But they have huge readership. We should understand. Young people love these books, they read these books, and fantasy is their literacy, they understand it very well. So I believe you're right, and this will be the venue for the future.
I have a question to Mark about Aesopian language. Would you consider День опричника, for instance, Aesopian language, or Сахарный Кремль, because it's everybody took it as a contemporary Russian. So would it be Aesopian language or not?
You see, Aesopian language is intended to hide. These books didn't hide anything.
Right.
In Sakharny Kremlin, in the Sugar Kremlin, there were characters that were very transparently modeled after Dugin, Duga, right? And I don't remember how Brahano was depicted, but there were no secret that they were. And of course, it was a direct sort of pronouncement about the vector of contemporary. So it's not Aesopian language. Aesopian language is when people were writing very carefully, historicized novellas from the time of Ivan the Terrible that would look like the novella is set in 16th century or 17th century, right? But some hints would show that no, they mean something different, right? Eisenstein's Dances of Oprichniki is Aesopian language, but here it's so directly politicized, it's so directly associated with the present, right? So the fact that so everything there is contemporary. Or even futuristic.
So just quickly, there are a couple of examples in this show, no longer on view. In the visual arts, there was Raoul Bale's Under the Sky series. Ooh, okay, you can't hear. Okay, Under the Sky series, Raoul Bale's series of screen prints, which had the colors of blue, black, and white to some degree, which was a kind of Aesopian allusion, that's how it's always been read, to the forbidden Estonian flag in the Soviet period. So that would be an example. And then one other would be perhaps even Nussberg with Dvizhenia, the movement group, claiming that even though he was speaking about ornamentalism when he first introduced his abstraction, he was actually performing as an abstract artist. So disguising abstraction as something that would be acceptable for the Soviet Union. But I would say in the visual arts, that's something to be argued about and thought about much further. One other question? Should we do one more question? I think Natasha. Let's say. Yeah.
Irina, you spend quite a lot of time here in the United States, and we always have questions of identity. So, are you considering yourself like a Russian-born American artist? Are you considering yourself a Russian artist? What are your considerations nowadays in terms of identity?
It's a question from all Klavdiy family.
Okay.
Including my granddaughter.
I was always a cosmopolitan. I do not consider myself Russian or American. Of course, after the exile from Russia, we were hoping that we'll become truly cosmopolitans, but it never happened because from one small ghetto, you go to another small ghetto, and the hopes to become a world-known artist dissipate very quickly. So I don't know, but it's not for the artist to decide who is she or who is he. I think I work and I'm still alive. Thank you very much for that. That would be my answer. No, I don't. I can say.
Okay.
I'm in a between, and it's a very privileged position, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen you creating works here that might go into a commercial gallery, once upon a time did, in Moscow, but you were really working between cultures. So with that wonderful finish, ambiguous close, let's end this now and continue a conversation amongst ourselves. Thank you so much.